way of sort of summarizing the take-home messages of the today's session, of the workshop. And the idea was, what we discussed with Jan, that the two doyens, so John, you accept it? Okay. And Jean-Pierre, plus Atsushi and Szabolcs will come to the panel. And you, each of you, will try to sort of make a very short summary, 5 minutes or so, of the take-home messages which you'd like to sort of set forward for future discussions of all the lectures and discussions of today. So that's the idea. Please come to the panel. And then let me just so shortly. And of course, the audience can always say words and shout and wave if you would like to agree or disagree with us. But it would be a nice way to kind of have a structured, I wouldn't say structured discussion, because it will not be a discussion, it will be a kind of a information session. Everybody will tell in a few words his sort of take-home message of today. But before we enter this discussion or this dialogue, I would like to call your attention to a few points. That basically this workshop is, as we discussed several times today, is related to a East-West, I wouldn't call dialogue, but a discussion on how Eastern and Western approaches can be different and similar at the same time, can have common denominators and can have specific features with respect to cognitive neuroscience, cognitive research. And this is one aspect. The other aspect is what Jean-Pierre so eloquently outlined in his talk, that there can be basically different mental operations, and the underpinning mechanisms can be different due to the enormous plasticity of the human brain in Eastern and Western cultures. And of course, Atsushi is also dealing with such things. The basic neurophysiological mechanisms behind the different behavioral patterns, cultural patterns, or even I would call that epistemological patterns. So the way how we try to learn, how we try to see the outside world. So all these things should be taken into consideration, because we'd like to have a kind of a program, vision, strategy to approach all these issues. So Jean-Pierre, if you can start.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I am not going to talk about what I said. You did it. Thank you. Maybe following the list of speakers, I was especially interested by Thomas Gabor about the differences between the circuits in the cerebral cortex of humans compared to non-humans. And I think this is something that we have really to further understand in the sense that we are all humans. There are cultural differences. And these cultural differences, sooner or later, we are going to find them in the circuits of the brain. I myself talked about the cultural circuits, but we have, first of all, to understand the standard circuits. And the fact that there is some kind of cascade of processes which are found in the human cortex that we do not find. Also, it's some kind of open door to more elaborate cognitive functions where some of the mental objects are long-lasting, like working memory and access or to conscious processing. So I think these are certainly, to my opinion, areas where one should do further work and, if possible, have access to some learned circuits in the cerebral cortex where one would be able to pin down the differences between East and West, if they exist there, at least for And language, of course, is one of the easy tools to work with at the brain level. Now, of course, Per told us about new ways of approaching cognitive phenomena through vision in the still non-conscious animal. Why not conscious? Next time. Yes. But I agree with you that this is opening to, in fact, a wide variety of new techniques, and I think we should be open to new techniques. And as somebody said, you may have said that there is 60% theory and 40%. Well, I may say this is not well recognized in the field of neuroscience because it's 10% theory and 90% experiments without understanding what one is doing. But fortunately, I agree with you. And it's going to change thanks to this meeting. Now, of course, I was very concerned by the use of primates. And perhaps one day, cultural differences between primates. You know, the fact that they are key experimental system to work on the brain, cognitive processes, and social processes, which were perhaps a little bit omitted in the present theory, because there is a social life in some monkeys and so on. Of course, the use of tools is of extreme importance as a step toward human cognition, because it's again a very characteristic aspect of it. And I was myself fascinated by this very interesting work and the extension to human and cultural differences, which appear, of course, I may insist, which are linked to social life and transmitted through generations. Now, of course, the issue of bacteria in the gut is something which is extremely attractive, and some people say that we react more with our gut than with our brain, but this is to some extent true in the sense that our brain function may indeed be under the control of, I would say, internal system that we have in our gut. But of course, there is still much to understand there. And I'm pretty sure that we are going to progress and have a better understanding of the role of bacteria, but also about how the interaction takes place. So there is a great future to all this, and that's my final conclusion.
The thing that I noticed, first of all, was that there was a lot of talk about models, but not really much talk about what constitutes a model. And if I combine that with something that's very important in Singapore, the RAHS procedure, where one tries to look at what things might happen and then what one might do to make bad effects less. I actually don't know another place in the world that takes that so seriously and really does something about it. Now, all of this, in my opinion, depends on the fact that, first of all, if I take a neuron and isolate it completely, so it's just the neuron on an agar plate being kept alive, that neuron will continue firing indefinitely until it dies. That's a single isolated neuron. I have a colleague who, in my opinion, should know better, that says when a neuron's not stimulated, it stops firing. That's just not true. It's simply not true. And if you start taking things like that into account, then the next thing that I think is very important is to realize that as you go deeper into the brain, especially into the forebrain, that there are loops upon loops upon loops of neurons, huge numbers of loops, and that it's important. We largely avoid that because the mathematics is hard to do when you have a lot of feedback, as it's usually called. But that, in my opinion, is a critical aspect of this. And it's one of the reasons, for instance, that the game in China called Weiqi, but in Japan called Go, that no one has built a computer program for Go that plays it other than the most amateur level. If you learn the rules in 2 or 3 times, you'll beat the best Go playing program around. Why? Again, because these tremendous number of possibilities in that with that simple set of rules. So when I take all these things into account, it seems to me that if we're going to talk about consciousness and things related to consciousness, that we need to know something about these systems with large numbers of loops. I think that would be my basic suggestion.
Well, this is a hard job, especially after John has commented. Well, by summarizing today's talks, there's many insights and many things I learned a lot. But 2 points. I want 2 points. Like Jean-Pierre pointed out, the Eastern brain and the Western brains are different from the circuit to its operation because they are adapted to their culture. The Eastern brains are adapted to Eastern culture, and the Western brains are adapted to Western culture. But those cultures are made up by brain functions. And I think we have to accept that way of thinking, for the Eastern way of thinking, Western way of thinking, is somewhat different. However, this is not a species difference. If we cross-foster the Easterners and Westerners, the Easterners become Westerners, Westerners become Easterners. So this is not a species difference or a racial difference. There's something else. It's within the plasticity of the primate brain that's designed from the beginning to adapt to something, environment, world, whatever. So, and since brains are adapted most efficiently to respective worlds, it is different. And it was allowed to be different when the older times, like 3,000 years ago, when both culture emerged. Population was smaller, much smaller, and there was no interactions. And well, even though interactions happened, they took a long time, sometimes more than generation time. So it could become separated. But now, the population is increasing. There's many mixture or overlap between them. And the information processing speed and also the transportation speed is enormous. So then the East are meeting West, West are meeting East. And we have to recognize that. Without aware that you are different from me, I am different from you. Beyond Westerners and Easterners. Everybody's different. But without accepting or allowing or, say, tolerant to the differences, we'll be in trouble. So I think this is now the time that mankind, have to solve this problem. And that kind of problem happens most severely could be in Singapore, where the Eastern culture, Western culture meets, and the traffic is enormous with trade and that kind of things. And I think this is ideal time to tackle this problem as an identical same species, the mankind, which have the different cultures and the difference, individual differences as well, and the diversity of the things. And it's a timely issue to tackle the cognition of the human cognition biologically. And that's one point. Another point is like a biome on the spectrum. That is that, well, the humankind tends to fall in the anthropocentrism regarding the many understanding of the world. And the neuroscientist tends to fall into the neurocentrism, regarding the brain as a whole controller. And there's a hierarchy, it tends to draw a hierarchy, the central processing, central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and organ that's innervated by the nervous and that kind of controlling hierarchies. However, I think we have to be aware that brain is only one of the organs relative to stomach or immune system, whatever, have function to transmit the information in between. And it's not the neural network that transfers the information. It's not only the neural network that transfers the information. There's an immune system which share the common cytokines and so on, share common molecules as a neural system. That's, neuroimmune interactions. And also the gut-brain axis. There's probably you explained a lot about it, so I don't have to explain, but I think this is about the time to relativize the brain and its function. The cognition is part of that, as the equal organs or the multiple organs that comprise the human body, and to relativize them and see what kind of a role it has. And one way to relativize it is the Western medicine and Eastern medicine. The Eastern or Chinese, traditional Chinese medicine deal with, somebody brought up with the nutrition and the food, and that is to accept the world as a whole without looking into the causality. There's a multiple, like interaction of the things, and there's a case-by-case lookup table, and they accept it. And relativizing those element components. And Western medicine, in contrast, is reducing into some molecules, small molecules, and explain about it. But we are starting to find the natural substance have the same function as the small molecules. That was basis of the traditional Eastern medicine. And so this is we are now in Japan. We are making this multi-organ network relativizing system as a national project. And it just started, trying to start it. And it's very difficult to convince the Japanese neuroscientists or doctors in this way. However, I think here in Singapore, it's a crossing point of the Eastern and Western medicine, is ideal place to relativize the brain and to make it in relation to other biomes or immune system, whatever. So these are the 2 points I had to summarize from this workshop today.
Great, thank you. I think my opinion is very similar to yours, but so instead of a summary, I would like to point out one issue, which is not something I learned. My main problem, I always have to discuss things together with neuroscientists. This is the huge gap between basic neuroscience research and the clinical practice. So I learned intriguing methods from the human cortex, how Prozac can act on neural network activity, or how spatial and time frame activation in the visual cortex can occur in ferrets and even your monkeys. But how we can use it in humans to facilitate clinical research? What is the way to translate these findings to clinical practice? And when I try to use my own approaches, I always see boundaries. So I think this is not a take-home message, but a problem we should think about, how to implement these methods and even philosophies into clinical practice.
can I just so one way that clinicians, I very much respect the clinical studies, and one way is to deal with, to connect the basic science and clinical sciences, is to reserve the unknown causality. And clinician, to save the immediate life of the patient, immediate there, you cannot just rely on the known, defined causal mechanisms. You have to control or deal with unknown unknowns. And that's a compromise. Accept the phenomenon as it is. And that attitude to have that control or make a good life with unknown causalities, I think that's a secret. And to relativize the whole thing is one of the ways to do that. And the Chinese medicine are doing that.
I agree, but I was not so philosophical. I was just thinking about if we can measure neuronal activity in the same way you do in slices in living humans, that would be a huge advantage. But there are technical, moral, and other limitations. And it's a problem for decades. But it's not a current problem.
I would like to thank Balázs for and his colleagues for the organization of this meeting. And I think one of the main conclusions I would like to stress is that we had different opinions. We had even a philosopher who helped us to increase the range of possibilities in our way of thinking. And this is very important to have a free and open debate. And I may say that the future of the neuroscience, the relationship with medicine, the relationship with the rest of the body, the relationship with the society in general, is going to emerge from this kind of debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And honestly, I don't want to lengthen this dialogue, this panel discussion, because we will have another long day tomorrow. We start 9 o'clock, same floor, but the other end of the corridor in lecture room A or lecture room 1, anyway, which is in the corner over there. So 9 o'clock, and we will go on tomorrow as well until 6:30, so there will be a long day. You have to relax because there will be another 6 very intriguing lectures tomorrow. So thank you for today. Thank you, the lecturers, the speakers of today. And we continue tomorrow. Have a nice evening and see you tomorrow.